Okay, so the last panel of the day, which I can tell you a little behind the scenes tidbit, uh, the best prepared panel, I think, on Sunday, when Alvaro was in Australia and everyone else was like everywhere else in the world in between, they got on a hangout and like hashed out what they were gonna do, and the rest of us just did it over email. So you guys get the Overachiever Awards, and now that I've set the bar really high for how awesome your panel is gonna be, do you see that jujitsu I did there? Last panel of the day, talking about a really important question, and I know, we have been alluding to this over the course of the day about how we engage with government as sort of the primary stakeholder of most of the programs that we work with, and now we're going to really dig into that, into what is the incentive structure for getting government to participate in your program? How do you create a value proposition that works for them? Going back to what Matthew was talking about earlier about like an app is not enough. We show up to the agriculture ministry who's paying 55 cents on the dollar to service debt and say, hey, we've got this cool app for you, that they're like laugh in your face. So what are the strategies and approaches that we use to get government engaged in our work, and how do we build trust and deepen impact over time as we work with them? So Zack Brisson from Reboot is going to moderate this panel of lovely people, and I will let him take it away and introduce them.
All right, well, thanks, Catherine. Way to set the bar all the way up there. But it should be a great conversation, right? Because structural reform in government is kind of one of the most important things and probably what most of us are trying to do. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. As Catherine said, my name is Zack Brisson. I work at a social enterprise here in New York called Reboot. And this topic is very near and dear to our hearts. So I'm excited to be joined by such a wonderful panel and obviously a super cool community that Code for All represents. So as Catherine ably set up, we're going to try to unpack that theme of structural reform for governments and try to look at some overarching questions to help sort of guide the conversation. One, as Catherine already mentioned, kind of looking at trust. What role does trust play in enabling or constraining reform, and how do we build trust? Looking at that dirty word of innovation, and what does it really mean to us? And is it a useful frame for thinking about structural reform or not, perhaps? And for all the process nerds who are probably here from the CFA community, think a little bit about the actual ways that we work and the impact that our methods and process have on outcomes and the goals that we're trying to achieve with reform. And then trying to sort of take advantage of the wonderful set of experiences this panel brings and everyone in the room, go back a little bit to more of the challenges we've all faced in our work. I know they've come up earlier today, but explore more kind of cases of where things just haven't gone right and what we can take away from those. We definitely want to have a really interactive conversation, like it's been all day long. So we invite you guys to raise your hand and ask a question at any point when you want to dive deeper on something that folks are saying. And we've left a lot of time in the latter portion of the discussion for really a true group back and forth on some of the issues we're raising. So with no further ado, I will introduce our very illustrious panel here. To my right is Kat Townsend, who's a special advisor for engagement at USAID. And I have the privilege of having known Kat for a bunch of years, so super excited to have her here. She's been helping foster and facilitate a lot of structural reform at USAID over the last several years around things like the use of technology and data, and the idea of how can USAID be innovative as an organization. So she brings a really great perspective in terms of what it looks like from the government side. Challenges, good, bad, and ugly. Next, we have Sheba Najmi, who is the co-founder of Code for Pakistan. Assuredly inspired by her time as a 2012 Code for America Fellow. So we have a lovely, tight community here, and it's, one aside, I've followed Code for America since its founding, and it's amazing to see the blossoming ecosystem of people that it's created. So it's great to have an alumni here. Sheba also had 7 years of experience before Code for America at Yahoo as a UX designer, so brings a lot of really interesting design perspective on how things could work. And I'm really excited for us to get to share in her experiences, because in less than 2 years, Code for Pakistan has a wonderful array of programming already in place. So to achieve that amount of progress in such a short time surely has some lessons for all of us. Then we have Alvaro, who is the co-founder of Code for Australia, and also has an impressively diverse CV as user experience designer, urban planner, open government activist, and serial entrepreneur, perhaps. He will bring some experience from sort of those several diverse roles and be able to help us think about what does it mean to sort of blend these different disciplines in the way that we work, and just what the heck does innovation mean. And last we have Jakub Górnicki.
Almost.
Close? Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's okay.
We were so over-prepared, but that's one point we missed, so you have to forgive me. Jakub also brings a very interesting sort of experience set to the table. He's the co-founder of Code for Poland, and also works with a foundation that supports a variety of civic engagement and innovation initiatives in Poland. Outside of all that, he somehow has the time to be a sort of founding community curator for a open source platform that helps professionals in the media space create software. That's right. Called Source Fabric, excuse me. And is also a serial journalist and who has worked with journalists all over the world to help them integrate new media into the storytelling that they do to try to empower and illuminate their audiences. So it's a really, really wonderful panel that we have here today. Excited to hear from their experiences. And to kick things off, I want to start with a question to Kat as our representative from government here, since we're talking about government reform. I think we all have probably learned at this point, if we're sitting in this room, how hard government reform can be. It's a process of years or decades at times, and can be frustrating. But it's also something we can't ignore and have to all aspire to. So Kat, having seen these reforms play out at USAID over the last 4 or 5 years, knowing that it's an acknowledged slow organization and how it adopts change, what have you learned in terms of what really gets stuff done and what can get in the way?
Can you hear me? You can. So I would break it down. So the question is, how do we get structural reforms to take place and to stick within government? So I'd break it down into 3 pieces: policy change, cultural change, and infrastructure updates. So how you get to any of these stages is a lot of what we've already talked about today. So you find your early adopters. Even if you have small examples and you work on the fringe, it can be scaled up. Others will get excited about it. They'll say, okay, I see what that example is. I know what you're talking about. How do I replicate that, and what can I do? So it's great to start with smaller pilots, smaller prototypes, and find some examples there. What's also very useful is to make sure that you market yourself very well. And getting the attention of higher ups is quite useful. So there's a few basic things to do. One is get a one-pager. Everybody in government loves one-pagers. If you make it more than that, people will not read it. So figure out how to market your message very well. The other is put together a few talking points or summarize your case studies in such a small way that they can be plugged in directly to speeches. Because in that way, people who are giving speeches are going to be able to use your example. And then that gets socialized, it gets spread, and then others will want to follow up more. And so that's more of the public engagement side. And internally, for structural change is make sure others can evangelize your message and understand how to do it. So again, those one-pagers are useful, engaging across an agency early and often, and pretty consistently. So giving them tools and products that they can share with others. Do you want me to All right. So once you have that in place, you've made a little bit of change, and maybe you can get a policy together. Now, a policy is very much top-down, but people need that, and they need the top cover to get their jobs done. So you must get a policy in place for structural change. The second is culture. So people won't pay attention to a policy. There are so many policies that are great, and nobody does them because they don't understand why. What's the purpose of this? So explaining and figuring out what the barriers are for why people don't want to do the work or they don't understand what its benefit is huge. And part of that is figuring out what are the specific motivators in any organization. I am very lucky to work at USAID for many reasons, but one is that the culture of USAID is like a nonprofit. And so the primary motivator for anybody who joins is that they want to help someone else. They have extensions on that, but if you can appeal to, and when we appeal to, if you do this, if you take these actions, here's how somebody else's life will be better, people will jump on right away. And they'll do extra work, and they'll change their practices, and they'll work longer hours, and they'll figure out how to do a change. And then finally, it's infrastructure. So for data, for open data, that's a lot of tech infrastructure. But any of the processes that are in place, reporting, kind of the supply chain or workflow of information, if you don't have those set up, then even somebody who's very interested in what you're doing and has the top cover policy, if they can't actually do the work, then it's going to fall as well. So to have that sustainable structural change, you need all three.
Was sort of the need for that political cover.
Microphone.
You talked about the need for political cover and how important that can be for an initiative for reform to actually move forward. That can be hard to achieve. Sheba, you work in Pakistan, a context known for contentious politics. How have you addressed those political considerations in the type of programming that Code for Pakistan has undertaken?
It's been interesting. In Pakistan, the place where we've had the most traction with the government has been in the KP province. There are 4 provinces in Pakistan, and the KP province is the one that's consistently in the news for the Taliban, or bombs going off, and sort of a dangerous place to be in general. And the reason why we found a lot of traction there's a few layers to this reason, but one of the main things was that there was a new government there in that province. And this new government had a lot of political will to prove themselves. And we also got lucky. Luck plays a role. So we got lucky. The World Bank approached us to run a civic hackathon, which we ran in partnership with an organization there called Peshawar 2.0, ourselves, the KPIT board of the government, and the World Bank. And so they were able to broker this relationship. And because the World Bank has credibility in the eyes of the government, even though they weren't offering actual financial support for that event, for that project, they're always a potential funder, right, to the government. And so we got lucky in terms of being able to build a relationship through them. And actually, our fellowship, from the hackathon, we started a fellowship program, and our fellowship program manager, Ali, is there. He just flew in from Peshawar, and our other folks from Code for Pakistan are there as well, Nabiha and Ashar. Going through that hackathon was an event that brought the government in collaboration with us and with citizens. And it was a launch pad. For us, hackathons have always been a means to an end. So it was a launch pad for a larger engagement, which was a fellowship program. And partnering with the IT board in particular was great for us, because the IT board has relationship or is relevance in all other departments in the government. And so, because there are IT departments in all these other departments as well. And so they were able to bring other departments on board, and together we created sort of a 6-month fellowship program and came up with 5 different projects that the fellows would work on in partnership with different government departments. During the course of that fellowship year, we built trust, right? And Ali did a lot of that with things, even things like, sure, helping governments set up their VGA drivers or their printers, and or giving them tools like Asana and Google Hangouts, to make their internal work better, or helping the director purchase a car on the internet, those sorts of things. Through the course of that, then we started establishing trust and influence, such that then we suggested that they hire an operational officer. Which they're now doing. They're writing a job description for that, and that's a new position. It's essentially the equivalent of a CTO. and they're doing that because we suggested that, and we have some credibility with them. So it's definitely a gradual process. You can get lucky, and I would recommend going through an organization that already has a relationship with the government, but it also takes a lot of persistence and another thing I would just add quickly to that is we try to make sure to give the government a lot of credit. So just even little things like last year we were at the Code for America Summit, and we just had an idea, pulled out our iPhone and asked Catherine and Jen and Tim O'Reilly to just say little blurbs about what the KP government was doing, and then quickly put this video together and showed it there. And the government then feels like, wow, what we're doing is people are paying attention to it around the world. And then they realize that it's about them, it's not about us trying to gain credibility. And we're also going to try and fly the IT minister to the Code for America Summit so that they, again, I think top-down, as Kat was saying, is important, so that he meets the folks that are involved with this, government leaders from around the world, and can get the context of what it is that we're trying to do, and then buy-in would be easier.
It's really fascinating, acknowledging some of the... Sorry, I'm so bad at this. Gosh. Acknowledging some of the really interesting aspects of being willing to build trust by doing things outside your mandate, right? Really just relating to people as humans and observing their needs, but then also ensuring that your work is contributing to the larger political platforms that the leaders you need authorization from are interested in. Jakub, you've had the experience of helping roll out sort of initiatives across several cities in Poland, which must have required a huge amount of trust and political buy-in. I wonder if you could add on to this.
Well, actually, no. So the program you're referring to, Open Cities, it started because there was one person in the city of Gdańsk who knew us before, and who trusted us, and who knew that we are not crazy NGO with some crazy idea they do not understand. We had an idea. They said, okay, this is something what we are thinking about for a while. We will trust you to do it. And together we've done this pilot program. And after it felt successful to the city, what we started to do is we took it from the trust phase into more structural phase, and we started to ask the mayor of Gdańsk to call other mayors and tell them, like, there's like an NGO, they'll come and they'll tell you crazy things, but they're actually good guys, so work with them. And that's basically how we started to grow this. And this is how we are shifting this from the trust phase, which is very important. And we've done many things actually to ensure trust, not only when it comes to because actually having mayors speaking on the city side is actually the place you want to be. Because you have the political cover, political will behind you. And from there, well, you don't have to do good things, you just don't have to screw this up. So that's how we basically proceed with the open cities. The other thing is how we try to get the political, because this is like a very broad topic, but what we are trying to do is, because we have this election season right now, we are trying to embed openness into the candidates. So if into their running agenda. So we are giving them all the arguments and whatever they need to have, to pitch to the voters. So no matter how many of them will be then elected, but let's get 5, and let's have those 5 have the open data and everything around it, civic engagement, embedded into their promises and so on. That gives us then a pressure point to actually make sure that this is going to happen. So yeah, that's when it comes to it. But having the political cover is a luxury situation and also very unique, I think, especially for me, because my background is purely, activist and someone who is outside the government, and it's more known for actually criticizing the government. So this is also what you guys have to understand.
A great example with the elections of trying to create incentive for people to commit to openness. And I think that's a wonderful provocation for everyone in this community, right? How do we make it a politically competitive asset to want openness? And how do we help governments see that we could win elections if we operate in this manner? It's a great idea.
Yeah, so Because I also want to refer to what Kat was saying about the benefit. So one very simple thing we've had in the city of Gdańsk when we were going through, when we were just before introduction of the open data policy, and one of the key points was the demand that all the software has to be open sourced, which was like a very huge deal because the city was surrounded with the companies who were giving them proprietary software for many years, and now suddenly they have to transfer it to open source. And of course, that's more expensive, at least what they were saying. And the city was asking us, what is the benefit of having the open source? So if you throw out all the things which developers know and so on, what we were telling them is that it is proven, because we can actually have data on this, it is proven that the open source gives you better code and better applications because it's publicly visible and so on. So basically, if you have open source software for citizens, that means that you are ensuring that the services you're providing to the citizens are better. So then we were asking them, why don't you want to provide better services to your citizens? So we were basically, throwing this around it. And they were like, okay, well, then we have to have better services, because then we will get slammed, by you guys and by other people. So that's how but it was tricky, so because they had all those tricky questions, which we had to find answers, and that was really good in the pilot phase. So that definitely the benefit thing is here it was very important.
That's a really interesting example that speaks to how we frame the approach or the problem of reform, right? And I think our community here, right, we've been fairly criticized at times as wielding hammers in search of nails, rather than necessarily sort of starting at understanding the root issue and thinking about the best approach to getting there. That problem often gets wrapped up with innovation. And Alvaro, I know you have some really good opinions about what innovation is and the process of trying to pursue it. Thinking about the mix of political forces, institutional capabilities, and then the general cultural desire for innovation, how have you seen those kind of mixed together in the work that you've been trying to do?
So I guess for me, innovation is sort of like a good hack, but without the technical component, which is basically doing just something differently, and it sort of works, and you find that you kind of change things a little bit, and you work through it, and then you change again, and go through different things. So because there's been all this sort of changes within government, and now in Australia we've had a lot of state government agencies that need to have open data by default, and it's simply just uploading data and making it published, and they're labeling that as something that, oh, we're doing very innovative things. It's like, well, yes, but it's just a task that can leverage innovation, but it's not necessarily that you're making innovation. So that's why I mentioned earlier in my presentation about, well, what are we labeling innovation? And if it's something that we find that we can do differently, and we should be doing it, whether it's innovation or whether it's anything else, then that's fine. But if we're doing something under the label of innovation, but it's just doing our work, then I find that it's not necessarily addressing the problem or taking you towards the vision. And I think in terms of structural reform, and it's more about what Kat was saying at the beginning. So who are the people that are frustrated with the current system, and who are the people that are willing to say, hey, like, we don't have an open data policy, but I'm going to be willing to do something around that, and just doing it, which is something that I was going to add from, I guess, in terms of doing that structure from an outside, from government. We find, and I think it's something that is relevant to any Code for Country program, that we all do stuff, and then other things trickle down. So I think that's key to show something, and then more structural change can happen.
Well, we've been talking a bit. I think I might have missed one hand or two, but anyone have thoughts at this point?
Hi. So you all talked about the idea that, or an underlying assumption is that openness is such a good thing that if you explain it slowly and with patience to the government, they'll finally understand the benefits and will cooperate. But at least in my experience, sometimes the government understands too well the benefits of openness and decides knowingly not to take that route because they want to hide something, for example. So it's not a matter of not knowing what openness is, but I don't know. So do you have like examples of making the government cooperate, not without being nice, coercing them to open data or forcing them to do some of these stuff?
Yeah, you wanna go? No,
Go
go,
ahead,
go,
Jakub.
go,
No,
go,
go
go. Too soon. Okay, so actually, when I was thinking about how we as an organization have accomplished change in the past 5 years, there are actually 3 tactics, and I've called them, being attractive, being friendly, and being scandalous. And the last one, and actually the best tactic is actually being friendly, because then you have trust between both parties, and again, you can actually ensure a structural change, and at the end of it, everybody is happy. Whereas being scandalous is something where at the end you still have a structural change, but like only one side is happy. And in our case, those were 2 or 3 cases where we actually needed to go into a court and sue the president of Poland, where after a year and a half we have won, or we had to sue the national high court, or we found something when we were analyzing data. We found something tremendously wrong with how some things were calculated by the lower house of the Polish parliament, and that structural change happened within 36 hours, starting with a blog post, finishing the next day with the Speaker of the House giving a press conference and that they were going to change it and so on. Now, she wasn't happy about it, but the change was made here. I think that finding this and highlighting watchdogging or whatever, so always works. But it doesn't build, in the end, the trust or understanding between the things. I'm not saying don't do this. I'm saying that there's like pros and cons to everything. Definitely this is much faster sometimes than if you go through the friendship phase, but at least when you go with the friendship, and this is the model which we're trying to go with, because when I say being friendly, I mean also being able to criticize, not only just say good things. This is very important.
Reminds us, right, to never have a one-size-fits. Oh, I'll get this straight before this session's over. I promise, guys. Yeah. No, we don't. That's why we're having a problem.
Do you want mine?
No, it's okay. I'll get better. But you're raising that there's not one-size-fits-all approaches, and that it's a good reminder to not have knee-jerk reactions in terms of how to follow these reforms, and to at times work slowly, build trust. Other times you have to be an adversary. And I think it's a good reminder for this whole community that different times and different contexts require different ways of engaging with different ends. Sheba, I think you.
Yeah, so I was going to build on that and add to that and say that, in my experience, technology can either build or reduce trust. So when it's often used for transparency, right? And if you do it right, which is if you sort of, one of the things that a lot of people create are apps that will tell you bus schedules, right? When is the next bus arriving, and you have that real-time data set and you can make that useful. Or you might have something, when I was a fellow at Code for America in 2013, one of the city teams, Chicago, created a 311 service tracker, which was in partnership with the government, with the city of Chicago. And people could, it was one of the rare examples of citizen reporting apps that actually worked, where people could report, an issue like a pothole, and then the government would report back and say on the website that whatever the status was. And there was a two-way loop between citizens and government, and those are great examples where technology and transparency do build trust, right? But then there's a lot of other things, like going in, for instance, expecting or asking for accountability and spending data to be opened up by government. Not a great way to build trust, right? And immediately they will have their walls up. Also, in terms of collaboration or these citizen reporting apps, if you It's very easy. People get very excited around technology, right? So like hackathons and things like that, the community really gets excited about those things, and you can get community engagement. But then you might build apps that are not used by the government or not adopted, or citizen reporting apps where the loop isn't closed. And then people will lose interest very quickly, and that actually erodes trust, right, between government and citizens even further. So how you actually go about it, I think, would be things that need to have some thought put into.
Well, actually, if I may just add up. So actually, when we go into a new city, what we are asking them to do when it comes to opening the first data set, it's always the spending. Because it is the hardest one to get out. Everybody's going crazy in the city. And because they think that, suddenly all the public spending contracts, whatever, is going to be available online. And once they get through this process, and it usually takes a couple months actually before the software is ready and the whole structure and culture, nothing happens. There is no. It's like it's more of a test for the people inside the city to actually know that this I'm just jet lagged, but this all going is to be. That's a good excuse, if you're from Europe right now. So I'm just jet lagged.
But that's an interesting anecdote, Yannick.
But it's a very important process. After which they suddenly see that there's increase of a trust from the citizens, from the media, because everything is available. Whereas those couple months, which were hard, because they thought that that there's going to be a lot of articles in press, how they are not using well public money and so on and so on. So this is also a very good, and it's also the hardest one to get out. So once you're done with it, it's usually much easier after it.
I'd be interested in asking the hypothetical, knowing the political resistance that can come from releasing expenditure data, right? How do you think the process might have played out differently if your first request and engagement wasn't about something so sensitive, but something that might have been viewed by the political decision makers as more relevant to their interests? Do you think the process might have gone in a different direction, negatively or positively?
I don't think so. I think that the transparency and the need for it is currently quite well understood by the politicians, at least on the city level. And we have set up the first example. And the one reason why we have chosen not to start with the capital is that we wanted to go into a big city, which will affect, thousands of people. But in cities other than capital are usually less about politics and more about good management. So it's much easier also to convince people there to actually adopt your agenda. And the other thing is that we are usually opening a lot of data sets, and that's being one of them. There are some towns which are more eager to talk about business use of open data, and this is where we try to focus the conversation with them. But when we were starting this was our first thing we have done in a cooperation with the government or another, like true cooperation. We, being this organization which more was known for rather suing and so on, we wanted to stay accountable for both sides. So we wanted to still be an NGO, but be more of a bridge. So we say, okay, business open data, very good, but you gotta push some also data sets which relate to transparency. So this is where we come in as both a carrot and a stick strategy,
I'm actually curious if I can ask a question there to anybody here or to anybody gathered. One of the general philosophies of how you get something done is you start with a problem. So state what the problem is and figure out then what are the tools, who are the people, and what are the resources that you need to actually address it. And I think that depending on what your natural inclination is, whether it's naming and shaming, which I think is very useful. Please don't do But no, but really, it's very, very useful. But others to be attractive and entrepreneurial. I can't remember how you put it. Yeah, you did say attractive. That's also quite useful. The other is just to be very steady and methodical. However it is, how can we shift so that people really are starting with a problem? Because I think, as Sheba was pointing out, that a lot of what we do is say, here's a resource that we have, we want to show how great it is, let's build an app. But that's not actually addressing any problems, so nobody uses it.
One of the things that I missed from my presentation was the fellowship that we did with the 3 amazing women was only focused on research, and we did that because of 3 different reasons. One was because the government didn't have enough funding for it to do a whole year fellowship. The second one was to be able to highlight the importance of researching through an entrepreneurial focus within government, because this was focused on this massive hackathon that happens every year in government, and most of the time it's just any product is dead after Monday. So the third reason was because we wanted the longevity of that problem. But yeah, it's totally a thing that needs to happen a lot more.
To process as well, which I think is interesting that we've got 2 people with a UX background on the panel, but talking very much about structural reforms in government. We, in our call that we were over-preparing with on Sunday, we talked a little bit about the notion that, in the private sector, good products and services are understood to come from good design practice, and that's gradually being adopted and integrated into the public sector. But at the same time, those tools and frameworks that help us get to the problem and then how to solve it come from a context where the primary drivers were profit and efficiency. And in the public sector, with politics and allocative efficiency for the economist out there, it's a much more complicated set of factors that drive what is the right thing to do. So particularly those from a UX background or anyone here in the audience too, it's an interesting discussion to say, how have those design methods in terms of understanding problems and getting to solutions translated to the public sector or not translated, and where do they still need to evolve?
So that's been quite a big thing now in Australia for the past 4 years. So in total there's 7 state or territories in Australia. 2 of them have now a state-based service agency. So any transaction that you make with government, there is a body that is meant to make them prettier and smoother. However, so everything looks great and it's easier and it's user-centered. But then you look at the back end on some of them, and it still takes 3 months to get a license registration. So yeah, so there is stuff happening and starting to happen, which is great. But yeah, it's not just the front end that needs to we don't only need a facelift.
Hi, my name is Daniel from Open Knowledge Foundation in Germany. I would like to go back to this question of trust in government, and we all need to build a relationship of trust with the governments we're working for. But on the other hand, I think that this whole notion that open data and civic tech is bringing back trust from the people in government sometimes, or perhaps is a little bit irritating, because from my perception, this whole movement of open data and asking for the transparent and accountable government is actually a symptom of growing distrust. So the question would be, do we in our movement have some ideas how we could actually use that growing distrust in government to drive change, rather than only pretending that we are rebuilding trust?
I have the other mic, so if I can add the question to what Daniel was saying, because it's very similar. So in my experience, the relationship between organizations and the government, I'm sorry, Felipe from Ciudad Inteligente, and co-federal advisor, yeah. So the relationship sometimes change depending on the kind of data you're liaising with, right? So sometimes data has a friendly face, that leads to developing certain kinds of platforms and apps towards improving public services, for example. But sometimes, as you were saying, these data sets unveil poor performance. In some cases that we liaise with in Latin America to corruption. So my question is, have you faced any challenges in your relationship, the one you're trying to build and trust and so on with government, when the data you're liaising with is actually unveiling some sort of, reasons to distrust, again, bad performance or potentially corruption?
Okay, so they were both really important issues to raise, but I'm going to push back on the specific framing of government as a monolith. So to say that government is hiding information or government's not being transparent, government's made up of humans, and humans are very accessible. And you can make relationships from person to person, and that's really what drives any kind of change, whatever institutions and organizations you're working with. So I think it's really important to remember that. As far as the, disillusionment with the code community as a way for further opening up government, I think there's basically been a rhetoric of government is terrible, I'm gonna come in and reform it. And that's, for all intents and purposes, a campaign platform that gets reiterated, at least in the States, every 4 years. So I don't see that as quite unusual. I do see this as a great potential to have those more collaborative relationships, if not at across an organization, but really with specific people that work there. Because I don't know how many people you know in government, but a lot of people who join government because they want to do good work. They have an ideal that this is a good place to be. Definitely some are interested in power and other sort of potentials for corruption and self-indulgence that come with any sort of job. But for the most part, there's people who really want to do good work. And so if you can find a way to enable them to do what they set out to do while they're in government, it's very useful. And I'll just tell you the one piece that I'm proud of that we were able to do starting out in this administration, in the Obama administration, is that we shifted a lot of the foreign policy rhetoric to say that because the internet exists and people have their own profiles online, we can't require that every single public message goes through 15 stages of clearance before somebody can respond, because that's not how quickly internet moves, and we need to be able to respond to people right away in some cases. And that opened up the opportunity of seeing individuals within government and having people encouraged to develop relationships even online so that they would be able to present a human face. And so I'm hoping that that's extended and that these kinds of actions and initiatives are actually growing that.
I want to say, I hope somebody was tweeting that, because that was really eloquent. And it's something that, a provocation I'll raise from my moderator's chair for this community, something I'm often frustrated by as a reformed sort of radical activist, is that we lose this lesson that government's made up of humans at times, and we forget this, right? The scale of problems in the world are massive, so at times that urgency can seem overwhelming, and the fact is there is corruption and there is entrenchment of power. But at the end of the day, if we're actually serious about creating reform, power's not going away. It's human nature. Power gets entrenched, and it's very difficult to move. And if you really want to change things, you've got to work with people, even when you disagree with them. And I feel like our entire discourse at times has made it harder and harder to remember that and to not fall into false binaries in terms of how we think about things, but to really engage as humans in the process of thinking about ideas and changing. So that was awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to actually add something to this because, sorry, may I? Okay, thanks. I wanted to the advisor gentleman to relate to him. Sorry, I don't remember your name. Okay. So I think this is actually a great test when it comes to when you go into a situation where you find something which will definitely complicate, if not ruin, the relationship, which you either have been building for a while or it was forming. But on a couple occasions, we have run into a situation where we did find some things which, not directly by working with someone, but by simply accessing what others could access to. And in these cases, even though we were trying to accomplish a change with such an institution and so on, we went public, usually by partnering some big media. And I do think that it created some distrust, definitely a lot of dissatisfaction here. But you know, for us as an NGO, who tries to ensure the quality of the public services and everything, it was very important also to stay credible to why we have started it. And it's in our DNA that whenever we find something really good, we clap, but whenever we find something bad, we also show it to others. But it's also about, you know, having the relationship has to be built, I believe, on a really solid, how do you say, what is the solid foundation, exactly. And also the other side has to respect us. And we've even had the first judge of the High Court in Poland publicly stating that the Państwo Foundation is making his work impossible because of the lack of and because of too much FOIA requests we were making because he was hiding some contracts and so on and so on. So he was trying to go other way and so on. So this was a really hard situation, and definitely we are not like there. I don't think that I think that when they hear open data, they all go crazy within the High Court. But the story was there. We couldn't just go around.
So I think there's also a difference, right, between Poland and Pakistan, right, and countries in the global south where we don't have the luxury of being able to point out, you know, naming and shaming and essentially putting things out there and saying that the government is doing that. We would instantly be shut down, right, by the government. And I mean, the system in which we operate is so different than in other places where where there is a system, right, where you have things that work. And I'm sure Justin from Code for Africa, you know, part of the reason why you guys don't work with government is because you mentioned the government is so corrupt that you don't want to make it more efficient, right?
Being deliberately provocative there, we actually do start working with governments now, but we don't wait for them. So a lot of the comments that were made previously are spot on. Get ahead of them and they catch up eventually.
Right. But the point being that, you know, the context is so different in a lot of other countries, especially in the global south. So one of our partners, we do a lot of things in collaboration in Pakistan, and I think that really serves us well. It, you know, it gives rise to a stronger civil society in general. So I mentioned one of the organizations we partner with in Peshawar earlier, Peshawar 2.0. In Lahore, which is another city, we partner with the Technology for the People initiative. And they're housed at a university, at an excellent university in Pakistan called LUMS, Lahore University of Management Sciences. And because they're at this university, they have credibility with the government because, you know, academia is seen as safe, like no political agenda, et cetera. Also, it's a great university, so you know, they already have that reputation. A lot of the work they do with government is in secrecy. So they will do R&D projects for the government that they're sworn to silence and they cannot put on their website or talk about. And it's phenomenal work. Like they'll create a prototype of analyzing crime data in Lahore to such accuracy that they can pinpoint that at this time of day, at this particular corner or this entrance to this building is where the hotbeds of crime are. And then they hand this to the government and let the government, you know, hope that the government adopts it and do this. But even within the government department that they're working with, like the police department, there's only one person who commissioned this, and that person cannot tell the rest of the police department that this is happening. It has to be in so much secrecy, especially because crime, like spending and accountability, is one of those things where government is reticent to share that information because it can be a blotter against them, right? So because given that context, they can't be public about what they're doing, but their ultimate hope is that they're creating something that's useful and that will make government, or at least the change agents within government who want to use this, better and more efficient and able to use it.
Empowering the change agents is a very important idea. You have a question?
So I have a question for the panel and to an extent for the room, even some of the comments, and I guess as a community, we often don't talk about some of these things. And I'm curious, as we sit in a panel talking about making structural change in government and focusing on problems, being more user-driven and some of the other things that were mentioned, and whether your strategies are to be more adversarial, kind of naming and shaming, but I've not heard anyone really talk about government priorities. And like within the context of thinking about like, all right, we want to have structural change, well, maybe the things that we care about or the things that we're focused on or the problems we're working on aren't actually the priorities for some of the agencies or the governments that you're working with. And so I'm curious to hear from the panels, and whether those are persons who are working outside of government or with government, how do you guys engage with and understand those priorities in like intangible ways? What does that look like? Are you reading strategy documents? Are you looking at, speeches? Are you like, where does understanding the priorities or the things that matter to some of these partners that you're trying to influence, where does that nuanced understanding come from?
Wait, can I challenge that though here? Because I'm standing right next to you, I'm gonna grab the mic. If government's priorities aren't the people's priorities, isn't that a problem?
And it can be the people's priorities as well. I mean, I know, and depending on what you're looking at, that can come from somewhere else, but that conversation around priority, like how do you come to understand that in your own work?
I'll take the moderator's privilege to be the third pushback on that to seed the panel. It's a classic divide, I think, we see in our community, right, between social activists and pragmatists, right? If anyone here's not ever read Albert Hirschman, please do. But it's this divide between idealism and pragmatism, right? The government's priorities may not be the people's priorities, and there's a gap there, but the government has power and control. And if we want to create change, we have to acknowledge their priorities, but that is distasteful to us as activists, right? And so how do we bridge those gaps? How do we understand what those priorities are, use them as entry points for change while maintaining our independence? Huge amount of fodder there, so explore.
I am not a... 1, 2, does it work? Okay. I am not a policy person. So I'm more of a techie guy. So what we are trying to do, I was mentioning those 3 tactics, and one, the being friendship, was when you try to convince someone. But the other one, the being attractive, is that you actually provide a service, which government also does, but you do it much better. And usually it is that the counter argument we hear against open data or against any tech is that we built this tool, but no one was using it. And that's like, math equation for people don't want it. And then we say, we've built this tool actually in a good way, and there's a lot of, there's thousands of people who want to use it. And on 2 occasions later on, we have been approached by the government who said like, okay, your platform is actually quite okay. We want the same. So this is basically to refer to what Justin was saying, to staying ahead, They've had a really bad website as a parliament. We've had a really good one. They've started to do open formats. We've done API. They do API. We do apps. So they are chasing us, and we are like trying to motivate them. So that's one thing when it comes to getting them on board of this. I don't know how about others.
I guess one of the things which is sort of a bit of a tangent is the whole thing about collaboration, which has been used a fair bit today. And often collaboration is used in a way that it's, we're collaborating to do this, and Code for X is the one implementing the project, but we're collaborating with government to do that. And collaboration in itself, if we look at, it's more of a cooperation. It's not really collaboration. So like something that has worked in the past to do other projects in Code for Australia has been like really going through a collaboration stage, right? So what does that mean? We go into a project, we have long-term vision, which is pretty, like it's sort of clear, but it's fluffy, and you don't really see anything tangible at the beginning, but it's about collaboration it's almost an objective, and that means that we're equal partners and we don't know where we're going, but we know that we're going to get there together, and we're pulling each other's resources as much as we can, and that increases. Something that we started doing is increasing our collaboration capability, and not only for us, but also that's something that we offer government. So hey, we run these programs, and it's something that at the end of the program, you're gonna end up with a much bigger collaboration capability with public-private lab partnership with the community. So.
As our resident government representative, do you want to try to say?
Like we were going in
a
sequential order. But yes, I'm happy.
Go ahead.
Okay, so
Mike.
I think it's a great question, and it's a great question again for as Matthew said, for the community, for everyone here, because it's different and everybody has their own people that they work with. So I'm curious how other people have addressed. From the government side and the government perspective, what I've seen definitely works is, and I appreciate Alvaro, you bringing this up, Alvaro, which is public-private partnerships.
Yeah.
Governments love to show that they're leveraging funds that are not taxpayers. It's great. So as much as you can find an organization that will dedicate funds, and yours would probably be the in-kind, and if they can work with government, if it makes them look good, that's great. We were talking earlier today, or somebody was mentioning how transparency is actually useful for the profile of government. That is true. That's kind of proven. So I look better if I'm working on these open spaces, I'm giving information out, I'm engaging the youth, all the sort of rhetoric that you can use. That is actually true. The other, which Matthew also mentioned, are speeches. When you're making the case, using specific lines from speeches can be quite useful, because that's what people are trying to deliver on. Even more useful are larger initiatives that are, at a higher level. Sometimes that can be the wrong direction to go because they are so large that they're just inundated with activity and with people asking for attention. So there's a balance there. And the most important factor in what the balance is the collaboration and cooperation. So who are the people inside who want to work with you on that? And then the final thing that I would just recommend, and I'm going to also shamelessly do a plug, is events. So fascinatingly, DC at least is very event-driven. And events are where you can get the most amplification for your message, and so it's a deadline, it's a forcing function to get something announced and to get attention for your project. So look at what's coming up and look how that's going to drive motivation and where you can enable that. So the plug that I'll put is if you go to africaopendata.net, there's a conference coming up in the beginning of September. And the intention of that conference is to examine whether these donor-driven open data efforts, what effect they actually have. You're mentioning, the first question is this just a blanket good? And how can we have a more nuanced conversation? We need to have that conversation. But when you have all the money and you have all the control, it's just whatever we ask for, you have to give in order to get that funding. So what we're trying to foment in that conference is a conversation and feedback on how can these kinds of policies not be seen as checking a box, but how can they be adapted so that the communities that are actually providing the data are also then able to use it to solve problems that they themselves are facing. So.
Sure. I'll just.
How much over should we go?
Hi. My name is Nati Karfi. Have worked for government for 9 years now, so you're all speaking about me. And I would just wanted to point out cat points of we are people. We work in government and we are humans and you can actually engage with us. And now I've been open data lead for the Chilean government. Now I'm back in Buenos Aires, where I am from, working for the city lab. And what we've done in the local community is we even have one bar where you can just pop in every Friday, and people from the community will be there. So us government representatives, people from companies like Google or Facebook, and NGOs that work with open data and transparency issues. We just all got to meet each other, just drinking a beer and trying to build up trust. And we made barbecues and everything. So we get to know each other as a person. And then, I don't know if that's the solution for everything, but just getting to know the people, person to person. Now I know who I'm working with, they know who to ask data from. And we can have really honest, down-to-earth conversations on, okay, so why don't you release that data? Okay, so on Friday, I'll tell you, in the evening, when I'm not wearing my governmental badge. But yeah, we're humans, so just talk to us. and of course, you can try to help us trying to innovate within government to make the point, help us to help you. Because sometimes our bosses are just locking projects. And I had this one experience working for Buenos Aires Legislature Power, where my boss didn't get the whole scope of opening up the data. And so an NGO just scraped everything and put it out there. And so I went to my boss and said, okay, so we didn't do it. Here it is. It got done anyway. We should have been there. And now we missed an opportunity. And so he asked me to set up a meeting with that NGO and trying to work and make the project even better. So that's it. Sorry, comment.
Was there someone before me? Yeah.
All right. Ooh. I almost got yanked. So I guess I got one comment to the questions back to us about how we're collaborating with government and changing process. Something we've been doing more at Open Twin Cities. I'm Bill from Open Twin Cities, Minnesota. Is kind of playing with the hackathon that we love and hate. So we've started having events, hackathons, that are actually focused on an issue. And then we use that as a platform to invite government and non-governmental experts on that issue to gather in one place. And then we actually don't hold a hackathon. We hold a service jam or a charrette, which is, on the surface it looks like a hackathon, but it's highly facilitated, and it's actually far more focused on understanding root causes of problems. And you still have non-governmental, non-expert people in there to kind of be that spark of, oh, maybe that's a random idea will come out that nobody thought of before. And it takes more effort and more resources to organize, but we've seen it leads to more examples of government actually taking an action that they would not have otherwise without us being in the place. So I also have a question. To the extent that a brigade or a code for all kind of acts as like a mediator, a meeting place for government and citizen, do you ever find yourself kind of having to, I don't want to quite say defend government, but kind of, government moves at the speed of government, and yeah, they did something that's better. It's not perfect, but it's better.
Some of the activist types.
Sure. I mean, all the time. Yeah. I think that's actually something that as a Code for America fellow, I learned more than anywhere else, which is really trying to understand the perspective from the government side. And if you go in, it probably works differently for you, but given your tactics from the outside. But since we were trying to be fellows collaborating with government from the inside, and same thing with our fellowship program in Pakistan, you have to understand the other perspective, right? And you have to find those change agents, and you have to champion them, and you have to enable them. And it is a long sort of legacy that they are up against, that they're working to change. It's not easy. This is, for them to make those changes. We have access to a way of thinking and technical skills and design skills that are not generally present in government. And so, it's not just going to be a seamless sort of flow from one to the other, but it's a gradual process, and you herald all the changes that they do make.
What do you think, Catherine? Can we take 2 more questions and then maybe do a few responses?
Yeah, there's one right here, and then who wants the last question? You call it, your hand.
The one there, and then you've been patiently.
Hi, I'm Nisha from a open data group in India called DataMeet. And I wanted to highlight this priorities question because I think it's something that we kind of deal with when we're trying to work with government. We did an event on education this year, and from a civil society perspective, it was like the government is failing kids, all the policies in the last decade have been failures, the scores need to get better, education needs to get better. And then from the government perspective, they're like, whoa, it's a huge country, and now that child labor has been banned, that doesn't mean they're in schools. Our priority is to get kids into school and to stay there all day and not leave. And then we can work with, so it was really interesting to say, okay, yes, as civil society and government, we have the same long-term goal, but they're dealing with it in a structured way that's very different than how we're thinking about it. And so the question I have is really, in a context like India, where a good bureaucrat who doesn't want to be corrupt has no choice but to be corrupt in some capacity, because they have to get through the day. How do you support really good government workers inside, create a community with them and us as well? Not so much to get things done, but to say, you're not alone when something bad happens. There are outside networks that will support you. And when you're inside government, you can't always, there's a politics game always, but how do you create those bridges and sustain them so that when real things change, where there's opportunities to really inject new ideas, you can keep those going and support the people who take risks?
Fantastic question. And so we have our last one over here.
Oh, it was on. Hi, I'm Alex. I live in Toronto. I'm with a group called Civic Technology Toronto. And there's been a lot of conversation about the two-way street between citizens and government. Oftentimes government will go to citizens and be like, hey, what about our agenda? Can you help support that? But oftentimes citizens go to government with their agenda and say, hey, can you support this? And I'll give a specific example to our country, or to my country. And that is the issue of climate change, because we have huge oil repositories up in the north of Canada. And we have a federal government that doesn't allow its citizens to speak to scientists, and it doesn't allow its scientists to speak to citizens. So that's kind of a non-starter. The government is going to the people and saying, we can't have a discussion on this issue. And I'm wondering what your advice, if you have any kind of similar anecdote around what you would believe to be effective advocacy strategies around that. Would it be somewhere on the spectrum between boycott or provide no effort support, so be there in the photo ops but don't actually contribute to the government agenda, or is it more active opposition, or is it just dedicate all of your resources to other issues or perhaps to other governments, or do it all in parallel? These are the options that I just kind of came up with here. So if you kind of have insight on things like that.
I guess the first thing that makes me think about that is what is your mission, or what's your agenda? Is it climate change? Then just go for it. But if it's something else, then do something different. If it is climate change, then yeah, just try to work with, I don't know, there are a million ways to do it, but I guess the first thing is what is it that you're intending to do through the work that you are doing?
To the comment over there, there's just one thing I don't have any great answers, but one thing I would add is that the governments are not typically incentivized for efficiency, right? So they get a lot of So for example, if there's a solution that might be a cheaper solution than the way they originally proposed to do it, that's not necessarily in their interest to do it that way, because then they lose the budget or the funding that they got from their donor agency or wherever they got their funding for the following year. So if if there's a solution that works for them, if it's slow or manual, as long as it's solving the problem in some way, then they're not necessarily incentivized to go and make it more efficient. And actually, Kat, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more. But so I'm not sure I have a great answer for you, but that's just to add on.
Sure. We're right. Yeah, and very much specifically on the point of something that may seem logical does not actually translate necessarily to bureaucracies.
But any last comments?
I wanted to actually refer to both of those questions, because I believe that there are situations when you cannot get government on your side. It's just, and if you cannot do that, get the people on your side. Because if you get enough amount of the people, depending on the thing you're advocating for, usually you'll get to the point where the government will have to listen to you. So in the both cases you were describing were pretty radical, and we were starting 5 or 6 years ago. Our actions were more radical than they are these days, because back then no one wanted to listen to us. So we had to make them listen to us. So that's different. So we have also adapted to the situation we are in.
I guess I mentioned this in my presentation, that it's going to take us all, and it's probably going to take us forever. And that's a quote that I borrow from a book I read years and years ago. But then, pardon?
Winnie the Pooh? Oh.
I don't think I could remember anything about Winnie the Pooh.
It sounded like it.
But yeah, but I guess that's the point, that it's not just something that we can solve it and then off we go. Like, it's cool to be part of this, and then it's cool to roll up your sleeves and create a solution and be part of that. And it may be tech-driven now, but it may be something completely different later on, at least.
Most specific to your question, because I think, Nisha, you're facing something that I would really need to look to you and to others to get my head around. But as far as motivating an organization that doesn't want to listen to you or even talk with you, I think boycotts are useful. I think satire is really great. So thinking of non-traditional ways of getting different kinds of people to weigh in is so useful. You can see the kinds of conversations that the comic news shows in the States have had, and how that drives change is really useful. And even from the government side, the president has gone on YouTube channels and Between Two Ferns and all these satirical shows, and it's a lot easier to digest, and it's a lot easier to get a message out widely.
Thank you to our panelists and to the crowd. This has been a really fascinating conversation. Just to wrap it up, I have been struck by this and trying to think, okay, as this community, we're not just the general public, we all represent an interest group, right? We want governments to be more responsive and to undertake structural reform. So I was trying to think, listening to all of our comments, how do we get better? So I was asking myself, well, who's good at structural reform now? And lobbyists. Lobbyists are very good at it, right? We can look at lots of examples. And so perhaps instead of activists, we might think about ourselves as lobbyists. How can we be better lobbyists? And what do they do differently than we do, based on this conversation a little bit? Well, we know that they appeal to the political interest of leaders, right? Even for their own purposes, but they do that. With money at times. But this community, there is money. We're not uncapitalized. We may not be equally capitalized, but we're not uncapitalized. And we have lots of social and human capital too. Let's not discount that, right? And lobbyists know when to push, and they know when to give the honey, right? They know how to play both sides, right? And depending upon the opportunism, right? And I think we have great examples of that already in our community. Look at who's here. Jen Palka, right? Talk about a lobbyist for this type of thinking. And she's worked inside, outside, gone both ways, and think of all the people that have come out of Code for America over the last few years. Not to make it just about Jen, I know it's a huge community, but that I think is a great example. And so maybe for all of us, like, let's be lobbyists for this stuff. It doesn't have to be a dirty word. We have good intentions. So how do we take some of these ideas and maybe be a little bit more persuasive in what we do? Parting comment? Sorry,
We really need to wrap up. Sorry, Akezia. Or were you?
I'm done. So,
okay.
but
Yeah,
thank you
we were
all.
wrapping up. Sorry. Why do you wait till the very end to raise your hand? Okay. Well, sorry. Sorry. It's 5 o'clock. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Our last panel of the day. Give it up for them. You don't need to sit up here awkwardly while we start doing the next thing. But feel free. They're comfortable chairs. So now we're going to do